Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, it's John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 6 of our 6-part Ixalan Full Set review. Today, we're wrapping things up with a look at all of the multicolor and colorless cards that you'll find in the set. So we do have a playlist on the channel if you need to catch up. We looked at all the colors in the color pie, and if you're not familiar with the series, just to catch you up, we're going to look at each color individually. And then we're going to assess the card in limited first and foremost, so how they're going to play in sealed and draft. And then beyond that, we'll talk about any cards that maybe are playable in other formats, such as standard and so on. Now, quickly before we get started, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to support the channel, help keep us doing what we're doing. And those ways include things like our Patreon page is linked below. You'll find some product links for Amazon products. If you make any purchases, once you go through those links, we'll get a small percentage. And then also Flipside Gaming has provided a promo code for our viewers, which is really awesome. Right now, they are doing pre-orders for Ixalan as well as Iconic Masters. So with that being said, let's get into today's cards. Admiral Beckett Brass. This is first and foremost, a fantastic commander card. I'm going to start with commander on this one because it feels like this was designed for that purpose. This is the pirate commander if you want to try to build the pirate commander deck, basically. Reasonably costed at a Grixis and 1. It is legendary, so there you go. Buffs all the other pirates, and potentially you might be able to steal something relatively good in the world of commander out there, where there's some big plays, some big permanents on the battlefield. So yeah, the card completely makes sense there. Standard. Does it get to see play there? I do think there will be a Grixis pirate deck, but my big question is, does it want this? This is not super expensive, but it's a little color intensive, and it does buff pirates, but we're going to look at another card that's a little cheaper, a little easier to cast, that also buffs at least the power of pirates pretty soon. That just might be a better option. Considering this is legendary, that could be a little bit awkward with your draws as well. So I don't know if this card actually makes the cut in that deck. If it does, maybe it's a 1 of, maybe a 2 of, but I do think the deck could perhaps run without this card. And I think that's what we're going to see as people start to brew and come up with the most efficient versions of those decks. Now, limited purposes, yeah, it's a good card for you in limited, as long as you have some pirates behind it. This isn't something you want to run if you don't have at least a fair amount of pirates. It does add power and toughness to your board, but you don't want a 3/3 for 4 with 3 different colors if you don't have a big payout, or at least a big enough payout for it. So sometimes you skip this card. I think this is a little bit better in a draft than sealed because you can draft a bunch of pirates, and if you do, then it's a decent card for you and you'll be really happy to play it. I don't even think I want to first pick this necessarily and try to force pirates. It's a real awkward first pick because it's 3 different colors. It really starts to shoehorn you in early, or else it's a wasted pick if it doesn't work out for you. But if I'm already in on pirates on pack 3, then this is a very welcome thing to see. So very interesting card just overall, and like I said, commander, it just feels like it's going to be great there. Belligerent Brontodon. This one's interesting. It's expensive. The ability is intriguing. Like, there's times where this ability could be good for you in limited. Each creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. Now, there are a lot of creatures, especially when you start looking at white and green, that do have higher toughness. You see a lot of 1/3s, 0/3s, even a 1/7 in white. So there's definitely some cards seeded in here that make sense with this card. And if you happen to have those, and this shows up in a draft, it isn't uncommon, then yeah, you can probably pick this up. You can probably pick up a couple copies of these because I don't think most decks are even going to want them. So if you happen to just luck into that deck, then maybe you find some use for the card there. But ultimately, this doesn't fit into a lot of builds. Like, you have to really look at what you have already drafted. Again, this is not a build around me card. This is something that's a nice surprise later. If, oh wow, you know what? I happen to pick up a lot of high toughness creatures, and this is going around the table and I don't really have any other big cards that I care about. All right, I'll play this, and I can probably get some use out of it at some point. It's not the best strategy, I don't think. There's a lot of better things you could be doing in this particular set, where the power level of the tribal just generally feels really good. You don't want to try to draft like the high toughness deck. I don't think that's going to be great for you. But if you find yourself in that situation, or maybe you have a unique sealed pool where it makes sense, then it's definitely runnable. Other than that, I'm probably going to skip this one. Call to the Feast. Good if you're in vampires. If you're trying to go wide, flush out some more vampire tokens, there's definitely benefits to doing that, then this card will be fine for you. Not too much more to say about it. As far as vampires go in standard, I don't really see them crossing over into Standard at this point. I do think we'll get more vampires with the next set, and that could be different. But I have seen some decent brews so far with people thinking about how to utilize vampires, so I don't want to completely count them out. I've actually had my mind changed a little bit from things I've seen recently. But even if that's the case, I don't necessarily think this card will make it, considering its casting cost versus what you're getting out of it. It feels like a good limited card, though, just generally. Deadeye Plunderers. Okay, this is a 5 casting cost 3/3, but it gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. And the low-hanging fruit here, of course, are treasure tokens. This also is a mana sink that creates treasure tokens, so this is an interesting card. For limited purposes, I don't think I'm first picking this, but if I have a lot of ways to create treasure and I have a good payoff card or two for treasures, and that could be anything from the alternate win condition we saw a few days ago to cards that are going to let me convert treasures into card draw, there's a couple of those in the set, then this card becomes a lot more desirable for me, and it might be a good pickup a little bit later on. It's an uncommon, so hopefully you'll see him floating around. Now, even the card itself, if it comes in as a 3/3 for 5, not exciting, but if I have a number of cards, especially low casting cost cards that are going to just inconsequentially hand me some treasures, then this gets a little bit better. Maybe it comes in as a 4/4 or 5/5, very playable. It doesn't have evasion, but I'm okay with that because of the other stuff I'm getting. Very playable card, maybe not for all builds. If you're not really into treasures and you have a better 5 drop that you rather play that maybe is easier to cast too, then you skip it. But it is very, very playable in a lot of builds. Standard? Well, I do think someone's going to try to brew the treasure deck, and if that's the case, this probably shows up in it. I don't have a lot of confidence in that deck doing well further in than maybe the first couple weeks of Standard. I think that's just the nature of some of those type of decks, but I do think it's possible this sees at least a little bit of Standard play maybe early on. Beyond that, there also could be some good implications for this in Commander, because again, feeding off the artifacts, you could be putting down a rather large creature for a lower casting cost. Dire Fleet Captain. Now, this is my thought on how the pirate deck's going to look in Standard. I think it's going to be a little more aggressive and a little less cute with some of these other tricks going on. And this is a good example of that. When this attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each other attacking pirate. And I'm not talking about trying to attack in with 50 pirates here. I'm talking about attacking in with maybe 3 pirates, and this is attacking in as a 4/4 that you paid 2 for. I think that's the kind of economy that you're going to see in Standard decks just generally, and that could be what happens with a pirate deck. Beyond that, this is also good for you in Limited because it's a bear with upside. Granted, it's 2 different colors. You have to think of this as sometimes a turn 3 play more than a turn 2 play, but it's still good for you. You'll be happy to play it, and if you have other pirates just to get it up, even an extra point or 2 in combat, it's going to be worth your time. Kasath Sun's Avatar. This one's another mythic, basically your commander dinosaur. So if you're looking for the commander for that dinosaur deck, you just found it. It's expensive. 3 on color for Naya, and then 5. But it does a lot. 7/6, trample, vigilance, haste, and it can dig up other dinosaurs and put them in play. It's actually really, really sweet. So you just have to be able to cast this card. Can you play this anywhere besides Commander? Well, I'm not going to touch it in Standard. It's just not going to be an easy thing to pull off. If I could pull it off, awesome, but I just don't really see it happening consistently. As far as Limited goes, can my deck cast it? That's what I'm asking myself. I want to play it if I think I can cast it. And there are treasure chests in this particular environment that help me get there. Of course, there's some ways to make dinosaurs cheaper. We've seen those over the course of the week. A little bit of ramp and green. If I feel like the pieces are there, I'm going to take the risk and make this maybe like the high-end card in my deck. But you have to really think hard about it. If you don't think you can consistently get this thing out, if you draw it, then I would skip it. But there are decks that might be able to swing it, and then that's excellent. Hostage Taker. This is a unique card. It costs 4 for 2/3. It's a pirate. And then you choose an artifact or another target creature. It can't target itself. They actually had to change the wording officially on that because it creates an endless loop, creates a draw if you were to target itself. So that obviously wasn't their intent. So they changed it, even though it doesn't say it on the card. Beyond that, though, yes, you can target an artifact, a creature, and exile it. And then you actually can cast it with mana of your own, even if it's off color, to get it into play on your side so you can steal it. So that's actually kind of sweet, a lot of flavor there, and actually is a good utility card. Even if you can't cast the thing, sometimes you just need the thing off the battlefield. So that's kind of sweet in itself. And it has a little bit of flexibility. You could use this on one of your own things that maybe has a good enters the battlefield effect and cast it again. There are times where that could be applicable, but I think most of the time you're just going to clear a path for yourself and take out something on your opponent's side and then maybe even steal it later. So ultimately a very good card. I think this can see Standard play. I think the power level is definitely there for a card like this. I don't think it's replacing, say, Cast Out necessarily or anything like that. There are cards that are better, but I think if you're in a pirate deck and you're looking for another body to be on the battlefield too, this is a good choice considering the ability you're also getting out of it. And it's good and limited. Like, I'm going to pick it up. Maybe not a first pick for me, but it could be. It depends on the pack, but definitely a high pick. Watley, Warrior Poet. Okay, here's our first of 2 Planeswalkers of the day, and she's a good one. I like this card a lot, actually. She costs 5, so she's a little bit on the higher end of things, but she's doing enough. 3 loyalty. That feels a little low for 5, but she's got a +2. That +2 will gain you life equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. A tad awkward because it depends on board state, and maybe that's inconsequential. A lot of times life gain is good, sometimes it's not as good, so it just depends on what's going on in the game. I don't like things that are too dependent on a lot of other factors typically. But let's go a little further. That 0 to get a 3/3 green dinosaur creature token with trample, that's awesome. So for 0, she comes in and she defends herself right away. I like that a lot. Now that -X ability, great for the dinosaur deck, and actually great for a lot of aggro decks as long as you can swing this casting cost, maybe more of a mid-rangey red deck. But what you can do with that is ping your opponent's stuff, and then they can't block this turn. You can get across a lot of damage. You can also ping your own dinosaurs to get the enrage going. That's actually pretty sweet too. So she's doing a lot of things. I do think she can show up in standard in the dinosaur deck. I think she's even good enough in standard play, maybe even for some other decks outside the dinosaur archetype. So over time, I think we'll see her true potential. She's great and limited. I don't think I need to say that. Basically first pickable. I mean, even the worst planeswalkers are probably first pickable all the time in draft. So, and in sealed, if you happen to get this, you'll be very, very happy. This is a fantastic 5 casting cost planeswalker. Once you can kind of get past that awkward start she has at the beginning. Marauding Looter. This is a looter with some heft to it. 4 casting cost 4/3, and it has raid at the beginning or end step. If you attacked with a creature, and it could very well be this one, is a 4/3, then you get to loot. So I like the consistent loot. I like the fact that this is a pirate. I like the casting cost. Sure, you could argue removal is going to hit it, lightning strike's going to hit it, but I think for 4 mana, you're getting enough here. And the fact that you might just be in the market to play pirates, this could be a good curve filler for a pirate deck, even in standard. This is going to be great for you in limited. I mean, I don't necessarily love first picking cards that cost more than 1 color, like gold cards, but there's times I might do it. This one is borderline first pickable, just depends on what else is in the pack. Raging Swordtooth. Okay, now we're going to talk about a couple dinosaurs in a row now that feel really good for standard purposes. They're great for limited too, of course, but this one costs 5 for a 5/5 trample, and it pings all the other creatures when it comes into play. So it hits your other dinosaurs, turns on their enrage. Feels like a lot for 5 mana. I like this a lot for a Naya dinosaur build in standard, and it's fantastic for you in limited as well. But be a little bit careful. Like if you're playing, say, some sort of awkward like vampire/dinosaur deck, this could hose you. So, I mean, kind of be aware of what you have, obviously. But for the most part, I think you're going to build a deck if you're in these colors that can support this card, and it's going to do some work for you. Regisaur Alpha. Okay, here's another one that I am very happy to run in limited, and I think could see some play in standard too. 4/4 for 5. Other dinosaurs you control have haste, and when this enters battlefield, you get a 3/3 green dinosaur token with trample. So you're actually getting 7/7 power and toughness on the battlefield for 5, 3 of which already has haste and can go right in and has trample too. That's pretty awesome. And the fact that all your dinosaurs from this point forward can haste in and attack. Fantastic, fantastic card. So yeah, this was another card that made me say, you know what, that Naya dinosaur deck, that probably could be a thing of standard when you have cards like this being printed. And again, I would flaunt with the idea of first picking this card, honestly. I don't like the fact that it's 2 colors, and it is a little dependent on other dinosaur picks and that I can stay in that archetype. So it's a little awkward, but in certain packs, I would probably still go for it. Shapers of Nature. This is a good limited card, just face value first off. 3/3 for 3 is very good. It does what Merfolk wants to do. It's a nice little mana sink. You can add +1/+1 counters. You have these Merfolk that, of course, are unblockable. That'd be sweet for them. And then you can also remove counters to draw cards. We've seen cards like this in the past, but this one, pretty economical, and it has a nice size to it with 3/3. So I like this card a lot for limited. Again, I don't know if I'm first picking this being 2 different colors, but I can see myself picking it pretty high in a pack a lot of the time. It's a real nice mana sink, and you can remove +1/+1 counters. They don't necessarily have to come from this creature, so that's kind of nice if you have other ways to get counters. It could lead to card draw for you. It's not that expensive at a blue and 2 to pull that off. The big question, does this see play in Standard? I don't think so. I think, unfortunately, it's requiring a little too much setup and a little too much mana commitment, and a 3/3 for 3 at the end of the day just isn't quite good enough. Now, if Merfolk come in strong in the next set and give us a lot of good tools, then maybe that changes, but at least for right now, I don't see it. Commander, though, I mean, there are Commander decks ever since last November. We had the Breed Lethality deck come out, and there's been a lot of attention on these +1/+1 decks. And even the year before, there was a good deck that played around with +1/+1 counters and such. So I do think this could be a really good commander card, and a lot of builds could just simply throw this in and upgrade a little bit. It might be a redundancy for other cards that do similar things, but that's okay. Sky Terror. Okay, this one has Flying Menace. You don't see that every day. It's a 2 casting cost 2/2 dinosaur as well, so a lot of upside here for 2. Granted, 2 different colors, so some of the time this is a turn 3 or turn 4 play, just depends on what's going on with your mana. But this is perfect in this set. I mean, you have a lot of raid ability cards, and this is a card that will probably have a pretty good line of attack a lot of the time. And even aside from that, there are cards that will give you payoffs for when you damage an opponent. We have one of those coming up that's pretty good. And it's also a dinosaur, and that's going to matter for a lot of decks too. So because of all the utility here, I feel like this is a real good pickup. Maybe not first pickable, but highly pickable, definitely in the higher end to middle portion of a pack, and I don't see myself being disappointed with this card as long as I can cast it. So it's a good draft card just overall, and there's a lot you can do with it, from adding +1/+1 counters to turning on raid and so forth. Now, Standard, does it see play there? Maybe. I do think there could be not only, of course, the dinosaur deck that could run it, but maybe even a Boros aggro deck at some point. I feel like we're getting a lot of Boros aggro pieces, combined with what's still in the format from previous sets. You might have something on your hands there, so I kind of want to see how that turns out, but I do feel like that is a deck to at least look at for brewing purposes, because we are getting some good pieces in those 2 colors that interact well together, and they don't have to be any sort of like tribal synergy or anything. I think you just have some good aggressive cards just generally. So that is something to watch for as the metagame evolves a little bit. Tishana, Voice of Thunder, another mythic. I like the card. First off, I'm going to go right to Commander with this one. I think this is an awesome Commander card. It costs 7, of course it's Simic colors, but what you're getting is a legendary Merfolk, and its power toughness is based on the number of cards in your hand. You don't have a maximum hand size now, though, and when this enters the battlefield, you get to draw for each creature you control. So for Standard purposes, I think it's a little awkward, because let's say there was just a board sweep or something, this card is not going to be a good top deck for you, assuming you can even cast it. Now, because it's so dependent on board state, okay, I don't like it there, but I think it's great in Commander. It could even be your Commander if you wanted to, especially if you were in some sort of go-wide token strategy or something like that. This card could be pretty insane at times. As far as limited goes, I think it's good there. Yes, it's a little expensive. Yes, you have to think about if your deck can cast it and how fast they can cast it. But again, there's a lot of ramp in the set, so I don't think it will be ultimately super hard for a lot of builds. And then again, if you have even a few creatures on board, I think it's worth the price. Imagine you have 3 creatures and you play this. You're going to be drawing 4 cards, and it's going to be a 4/4. Yeah, that feels good for 7 mana. Sign me up, right? So yeah, this is first pickable, even though it is off color with 2 different colors. I'm okay with that. I would go ahead and pick it. So it has that much of an upside that I'd be comfortable with it. Vona, Butcher of Magan. This is a good mythic as well. Now, I was kind of going back and forth in my head whether I thought this would see Standard play, and here's what I concluded. Maybe in a normal Standard, no, it's just a little too fragile, too removal for what you're paying into and what you're trying to do with the thing. But in this particular Standard, I mean, we lost a lot of cards. It's very narrow right now. And because of that, combined with the fact that there's a lot of hyper-aggressive decks that are doing well, like Ramanap Red, I think this might actually see Standard play. Now, this could be in different types of decks. I mean, Vampire decks, I didn't quite think they would get there, honestly, in this meta. Maybe when the next set comes out. But I have seen some people brewing some interesting things with vampires. Who knows? Maybe one slides in under the radar. That could actually be pretty awesome if that were to happen. But even if it doesn't, I do think this could just be a good beater that allows you to make up for the life lost early from some of these aggressive decks. Now, beyond that, it's a good commander card. Maybe it's not something you necessarily want as your commander, but I think the ability's good enough. It's a little awkward. I mean, you can only use it on your turn, and it's a vigilance creature, so if you can't get a clear attack with it, you have to use the ability instead and then hope for a clear attack next turn. That's a little slow. Also, you can't attack and then use it to defend, so you can't take advantage of that vigilance all the time if you use the ability. But with that being said, the ability's good, and there's a lot of commander decks out there that focus on life gain, so there's a lot of potential utilization for this card as the game goes on, especially against some big targets, and I find that pretty awesome considering it is destroy target non-land permanent. Now, limited is a great limited card, and even though, yes, it is a dual color card, it can be first pickable, I think, in a lot of packs. This thing, your opponent's got to deal with it, or else they can't withstand taking 4 damage or chump blocking this thing while you continually gain life. They're not going to win a game like that. So overall, I think it's a pretty cool card. Vraska, Relic Seeker. Okay, here's their second Planeswalker. She's awesome. Now, I want to point out, first off, she's a 6 casting cost Planeswalker, which some people don't like that much, but I'll tell you this. 6 casting cost Planeswalkers, they can see play in Standard. We've seen Chandra Flamecaller, we saw the Sorin that was 6 not too long ago, so there's definitely decks that will want to utilize stuff like this. So what's your payout for paying 6? Well, actually quite a bit. 6 loyalty. Really nice start there. Has a +2 on top of it, so she can go right up to 8. And oh, by the way, that +2 protects her by giving you a 2/2 Black Pirate Menace token. That's awesome. Now, what else is she doing? Well, -3, destroy target artifact, creature, or enchantment, and she gives you a treasure token. Then the -10, target player's life total becomes 1. Okay, that's going to make a bad day for some people in Commander. So, here's the thing. Ultimately, with this card, paying 6 for this, it can immediately defend itself and go up to 8. Really sweet, especially considering all the ramp we've seen in the set and such. So yes, this does see play easily, I think, in Standard. I think this card's actually going to see a lot of Standard play. It can fit into a lot of different decks, too. It doesn't have to be like the Pirate deck or anything like that. Any deck that can swing these colors, I think, will be happy to run something like this, especially if they have a little bit of ramp in there. It doesn't have to be a lot of ramp, but just a little bit of ramp, and you're playing this on maybe turn 5, and it's going to feel really, really good for you. So expect to see a lot of her down the road in this meta and many metas that come, I think. Now, limited, yes. I don't think I need to say this, but first pickable, go for it. Don't worry about the dual colors or the 6 casting cost. This thing is a beater for you in draft or sealed. So you're going to be really happy to have the card. As far as Commander goes, I mentioned this earlier, but if you can pull off that -10, someone's having a bad day. Yeah, and I think this is good in Commander too, of course. Great card overall. I'm glad to see Vraska back, and they gave her a really good card. All right, let's move on to some artifacts. We're starting off with a reprint with Cobbled Wings. If you've ever played with this card before in Limited, you know it's actually better than it appears. It only costs 2, and 1 to equip, and it gives something flying, and more importantly, it's just resilient. Like, it's an artifact that your opponent's going to have to deal with. So if you put it on a creature, they get some damage across, and they kill that creature, well, you just put it on another creature, and so on and so forth. Or as you build up bigger creatures, you move it from creature to creature, and it can get really annoying really quick if your opponent doesn't have an answer for it. So it's a good limited card for sure. Conqueror's Galleon, which transforms into Conqueror's Foothold. I like this for limited. I'm going to start with Standard, though, and just say I think it's a little too expensive, and it's asking you to jump through a few too many hoops for Standard, and it's too situational. Once you get to the other side, it's assuming you have expendable mana. So not a good Standard card. But for limited, I pay 4, I crew 4. If I can pull this off at some point and attack with it and then turn the card, this is a nice utility card as the game goes on. It allows me to take my excess mana to either loot, draw, or return a card from my graveyard to my hand as target card. So it's not just creature, which is pretty sweet. Yes, it does require mana to do those things, but again, if you're in a board stall and going later into a game, you're going to be very happy to have this card. It's going to definitely tilt the scales in your favor. Now, it isn't the easiest thing to always pull off, and that's the thing. Considering the resources you're going to have to put into it to pull it off and stay alive, it is a little bit of a risk, but I think it's worth the risk. I think the payout's good enough that I would run it and be pretty happy with it, quite honestly. Maybe I'm not first picking it, but if I pick it up early on in a pack, I want to try this card out. I think it'll be fine. Like I said, not for Standard. I think it could be good for you in Commander, though. It's definitely a card that I would want to try in Commander because the payout on the other side I think is worth the trouble. Dowsing Dagger. Okay, I was alluding to this card a few moments ago, but this transforms into Lost Veil, and this is a decent card. It costs 2. 2 to equip. It gives your creature +2/+1. Okay. But it also gives your opponent a couple 0/2 defenders when it enters the battlefield. Okay, maybe it's a little awkward. But then, if you can get damage across with this, you have the option, if you choose to transform it to Lost Veil. And Lost Veil is basically a Lotus Veil, recurable Black Lotus. And just every time you tap, you don't have to sacrifice it. You get 3 mana of any color. So that's really good, assuming you have something to put that mana towards, right? But if you do, you're going to be having a pretty good day, right? So this is a really good card. I think this is first pickable easily and limited in draft. It's a great card to pick up in sealed, of course, too, if it's in your pool. The 0/2 tokens, I'm not too worried about those because there's enough evasion in this set that's trying to play along with raid anyway that I feel like it's not going to be too hard to turn this if I want to turn it, or else I might just keep beating down with it. Who knows? There's unblockable creatures like some of the merfolk we've seen. There's some other creatures like we just saw the Flying Menace creature. Like there's a lot of reasons that this card isn't going to be terribly hard to get across if you really, really put your mind to it. So yeah, great there. No worries. And again, it's versatile. If you just need to keep beating down because you're just winning now, then keep beating down. But if you're behind a little bit, you need to catch up, use the Lotus Veil to play another bigger play or something like that. Could be really good. Standard, does it get there? I think it does. Again, it's ramp, it's color fixing, and there's going to be decks out there at some point in the meta, even if it's not right away, they're going to want something like this. And again, I don't think it's too difficult to pull off. It's not instant, but it does make you do a little work. But I don't think it's impossible for a lot of constructed decks to make this happen. Great card in Commander. I feel like this is like a Commander staple. Like every Commander deck can run this and probably wants to run this, and it's going to be super, super sweet. Easy to turn there if you want it to turn because you'll have more lines of attack, more targets and such. So yeah, this is awesome in that regard too. Dusk Legion Dreadnought. This one's a 4/6 Vigilance, crew 2 for 5. Okay, first thing I want to point out, for the most part, vehicles in this set, they're not going to be as crazy good as they were in Kaladesh block. Kaladesh was their first attempt at vehicles. They probably went a little too far in the power level, and now they're snapping back probably a little too far in this set. So some of these are kind of like, eh. This one is very eh. I mean, is it playable in limited? Yeah, it's playable. 4/6 Vigilance. The crew 2 is nice, real cheap crew there, and it costs 5. So you can pour a couple vampires into this, like vampire tokens, and get a nice 4/6 Vigilance. That's actually pretty good, and actually might be worth the 5 mana. So there's a lot of decks that'll be happy to run this. Some decks will have better things to do at 5 and won't really care about this too much. So it just depends on your build, but very playable. It doesn't go beyond that, though, really. Elaborate Fire Cannon. This card's interesting. It feels almost out of place in the set a little bit. It costs 2. It's an artifact. It doesn't untap during your untap step. You can pay 4 and tap it, and it will deal 2 damage to target creature or player. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may discard a card. If you do, untap it. So there's a lot going on here. There's not a lot of good like upsides or hidden upsides for discarding a card in the set. I mean, there's a little bit of graveyard interaction, but not a whole lot. I mean, you don't have like madness in the set or anything like that. So even the previous set had the idea that you can get benefits from discarding a card. So I think this does play maybe better with Amonkhet than it plays with some of the cards you're going to see in this set, but I don't necessarily think this is good enough to see standard play or anything like that. It just feels too conditional, and it feels like too much of a resource drain for you there. Now, Commander, same thing. Like, it's not a horrible effect, but I think there's other cards that do this more efficiently, so kind of why am I going in this direction? Maybe this is a clue to something we're going to see in the future in Dominaria, where there's a better payoff for discarding or something along those lines. But I think the ultimate question is, we know it's not great in those formats, but is it okay in Limited? I think it's okay in Limited. Here's where I like it. It's cheap. It only costs 2. And if you're in a board stall, like in a really grindy game, then maybe I board it in once I already had a grindy game 1. And if I'm just drawing some lands and not really doing anything, I can pitch the land to untap this, pay 4, do 2 damage. I actually could pull ahead of my opponent. Now, it's a very specific situation, and like I said, I'm probably not main decking this. I might bring it in, though, if I'm in a really grindy matchup or something like that, and just kind of hopefully let this carry me into a win for game 2 or game 3. But I don't know, it's awkward, but don't forget about it, because it does have a purpose. Fell Flagship. Okay, I do think this sees standard play because of that first line there. Pirates you control get +1/+0. Now, aside from that, I don't think this card's very impressive. 3 casting cost, 3/3, crew 3, and if it can connect to a player, it makes them choose and discard a card. Okay, that's fine. Maybe they'll be relevant at times, and I will say with the increased power, it's easier to crew, so that's kind of interesting. but I think it sees play mostly because of the buff it's giving to pirates, and that's basically it. Now, aside from that, limited purposes, I think it's fine there. Again, same thing applies though. I'm not playing this unless I have at least a fair amount of pirates for it to matter. And if I do, then okay, I'll run this. If I don't have enough pirates, then I'm probably going to skip it and run a different 3-drop. Gilded Sentinel. Okay, this is a curve filler for limited if you're desperate for a 4-drop, and that's about it. It's serviceable, 3/3 for 4, fits into any deck. That's kind of nice if you need it, it's there for you. A lot of times it won't make your cut. Hierophant's Chalice. This one costs 3. It's a common. It's a mana rock. You can only get colorless out of it, though. And when it enters battlefield, it drains an opponent for 1 life. So it's kind of playing along with the vampire concept, but I don't really think it's doing enough, quite honestly. If I'm really desperate for a mana rock for a little bit of ramp, then I'll run it. But I think with treasures and all the other stuff going on in this particular set, I think it gets overshadowed, and I think a lot of times doesn't make your cut. Pillar of Origins. This is a very good mana rock for this set. It only costs 2. You pick a tribe when you cast it. You can tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, but you can only spend it to cast a creature spell from the tribe you chose. So for limited purposes, this is actually pretty good for a number of reasons. Sometimes you go really deep in a particular tribe, and then it's just a mana rock for you. Some of the tribes are 3 color based, like you have your pirates in Grixis, you have your dinosaurs in Naya, so this is especially good for those tribes. Sometimes you might simply be just splashing a couple cards from another tribe, and this is going to help you cast those cards potentially. So this is a card that's a lot of utility actually for Drafted and Sealed in the format. I like that a lot. As for Standard, I think the same thing's going to happen there. I think you're going to see some Naya Dinosaur decks, some Grixis Pirate decks, and they're going to love to have a card like this. It's going to help smooth out their colors and ramp them a little bit. It just completely makes sense, and it's great for Tribal Commander too. Pirate's Cutlass. To me, this is a limited card that helps bolster the pirates that you have. You want to make sure you at least have a fair amount of pirates, though, before you run this. Because if you pay 3 for this and it goes right on a pirate, giving it +2/+1, that's actually pretty decent. But if you pay 3 and then have to equip 2 more for +2/+1, it's starting to lose its luster for me. But this is good with pirates that want to be aggressive, turn on raid and such, so I don't mind running one of these as long as I have enough targets in my limited build. Primal Amulet, which transforms into Primal Wellspring. This is an interesting card. First off, I'm going to say this. For limited purposes, I don't think it's that great because most of the time limited decks are going to be very creature heavy and not have as many instants and sorceries. They'll have some, but I don't know if it's enough for this to matter that much. Now, you might every once in a while end up in a build where this is better, and then more power to you. It's awesome that you can use this card, but I think it's going to be pretty rare. Beyond that, this is meant for constructed purposes. I think this is great in Commander. I'm going to start there because I think this makes a lot of sense. It costs 4. That's not too much of a commitment in Commander. And then instants and sorceries are going to be a little bit cheaper. It lets you get them out faster. And then from that point forward, you have the option of either keeping this as is and making your stuff cheaper, or eventually letting it transform and then forking your instants and sorceries. Also, the mana you get from this does not have to be used on instants and sorceries. You can actually use that on anything, so that's actually pretty sweet too. So great commander card in a heavy instant sorcery style deck, definitely. Now, standard, I don't know, cost 4 to do it. That's not horrible considering the discount you're getting beyond that, but I don't know if a lot of decks are going to make that commitment right off. If there was like a really streamlined burn deck in standard, then maybe, but I don't think that's necessarily going to happen in standard. I think your red decks there are going to look more like Ramunap Red than they are a true burn style burn deck. Now, modern burn, this would be awesome, but I think it's too much of a commitment at 4 mana to get it out, honestly. So I think this is a commander card, but it's a very good one. Prying Blade. Okay, my question to you is, how bad do you want treasure tokens? This isn't horrible. It costs 1 and 2 to equip for a +1/+0, and then when the creature connects, you get a treasure token. Very simple concept, but there's a lot of ways to get treasure tokens. The only reason I'm playing this is if I have a really good payoff for treasure tokens where I can convert it into card draw. There's a couple cards that do that in the set, or maybe I have the alternate win condition or something like that, and I'm just all in on that plan. Then maybe I run this, but I think most of the time I'm going to skip this one. Sentinel Totem. This is a great graveyard host card, and I'm sure it's here because they want to start closing off some of those graveyard shenanigans from Amonkhet. Let the new set flourish. That's a normal tactic when you move over to the new block. But this is so pushed. I mean, 1 casting cost, tap, exile, and exile cards from all graveyards. Oh, and also you get to scry 1 when it enters battlefield on top of everything. So it's doing a lot for very little. And it feels pushed enough to actually see sideboard play in multiple formats. And I'm talking about Vintage even, Legacy, Modern, all the way up to Standard. Assuming in Standard there's a graveyard interaction that you're concerned about, which may or may not be the case at different points in the meta. So you might see less play there. But I feel like it's actually playable in those other formats. And yeah, there's times you might rather have Rest in Peace. And yeah, there's times you might rather have something like Relic of Progenitus because it's more of a slow burn card. It just depends on what you're up against. But if you're up against something really aggressive with a graveyard like Legacy Dredge or something, I feel like this card is actually a card you might want to have there. So I do think that sees sideboard play in a lot of places ultimately. And even for limited, don't forget it's there because there is some light graveyard interactions in the set. And if your opponent is exploiting those, then yeah, remember to side this in. It could come in helpful. Shadowed Caravel. This is okay. I mean, it's not a horrible card by any means if you have some Explorer behind you, right? I think Explorer is a fantastic mechanic. I don't know how easy and how often you're going to get to Explore, though, because it feels like most of the time there just enters the battlefield effects, and if you happen to get a lot of Explore, wonderful, this card becomes a lot better. But if you have just a couple Explore triggers in your deck, I don't think it's all that great. It's a 2 casting cost, 2/2 crew 2, and unless you can build it up to maybe 3/3, 4/4, 5/5, it's not really that interesting. So if you think you can do it, go for it, run it. If not, you might skip this for something else. Sleek Schooner, another okay card for limited. It costs 3. Crew 1 is nice for a 4/3. So what I like about it is if you're running a lot of small creatures like vampire tokens or something like that, every once in a while if you need a little bit of heft, then maybe you can just crew with one of those tokens into this 4/3 and it could be okay for you. So it's not for every build, but it's fine if you need it. Sorcerous Spyglass. When I first saw this card, I was kind of like, well, could you play this out of sideboards, maybe for Modern, even Legacy? And I was like, well, I'm probably not going to play this over Pithing Needle because this costs 1 more. But I started thinking about it a little more. And you get to see your opponent's hand. That's actually a big deal. And I even thought, what if I wanted to main deck this? Like maybe I had a deck that was vulnerable to a certain strategy or a certain card, and I felt like main decking this would make sense because I could play this on turn 2, see my opponent's hand, get a good idea of their matchup, and make a good decision as to what to shut down. That's an interesting way to think about a card like that, because typically a Pithing Needle you'd play on like your second, third game out of the sideboard, right? Now, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking too hard about this. Maybe Pithing Needle's just simply better at the 1 mana spot. But you know what? I at least want to test this card out. I think it would be worth trying, if nothing else. And I'm a little bit intrigued by it. Standard, yeah, it's a good sideboard card. You don't have Pithing Needle there, so you'll be happy to play this in lieu of it. And it's going to help shut down some strategies if you need to, or certain cards and strategies. I like the fact that they included a card like this, and they really should think about doing this more often in Standard, because this does shut down the potential of certain cards getting out of control. And maybe if there was a card like this in Standard earlier, we would not have had all the issues with the bannings and such that went on over the course of the last year. So having things like this, I think, makes a lot of sense. It's a nice safety valve to include. As far as limited goes, same idea there. You're probably not going to start off with this, but once you see what your opponent's playing and what you're up against and what you're concerned about, might not be a bad idea to go ahead and side it in from time to time. Thaumatic Compass. This transforms into Spires of Vraska. Spires of Vraska is kind of a take on Maze of Ith, which is a classic card from the Dark. Very good card for limited purposes and maybe even standard purposes. Now, wording-wise, rules-wise, it's a tad different than Maze, but conceptually it's a similar card. Now, the big question is, how easy or hard is it to get there? I don't think it's too bad. You pay 2 for the artifact. Once you end a turn with 7 lands, you get to transform. In fact, you have to transform. And then you get the Maze of Ith style card, and that's kind of sweet. In the meantime, I don't know if this card does a whole lot for you, considering it's costing 3 to activate. But if you have extra mana, or maybe you're just stumbling a little bit and you have no other choice, you can go ahead, tap this, pay the 3, and thin your deck a little bit, grab basic lands, which are going to ensure that you hit your drops at least, and also hit the colors you need. It's not really ramp, but at the very least it helps you get your stuff and keep you moving if you're running into trouble. So it's okay in that regard. The front side is fine, but nothing super exciting. The back side, though, could be very relevant for you, especially if you're trying to find a defensive card. So with that being said, I do think it's very playable and limited. It only costs 2. It's not a huge commitment, so I find myself probably running this more often than not. When it comes to Standard, could it get there? I like the other side, but I don't know if every deck is going to have the room to put this in and kind of hope that it works out. I think it's a little too situational, and it's going to take a little too much time for it to matter, actually. Commander, though, I would play this in Commander, be very, very happy with it. Treasure Map, which transforms into Treasure Cove. Okay, This card's actually pretty sweet if you can transform it again, and you have a lot of ways to create treasures, and the front side actually gives you some treasures, which is cool. But if you have a steady stream of treasures coming in after the 3 you get from the initial transformation, then this pretty much becomes draw 2 cards a turn, and that's really, really sweet. And the big question is, again, how hard is it to get there? Well, it's not too bad. It costs 2. 1 to activate and tap, and you get to scry 1. Now, once you do that 3 times, you'll have enough counters on it, and this will have to transform. And then from there, you'll get 3 treasure tokens, so you kind of get your mana you put into it back a little bit, which is kind of nice. But maybe more importantly, now you can fuel the treasure cove side with those treasure chests and draw some cards over time. So, of course, it's a little slow. It's a card each turn, but you know what? That's still awesome. Like, think of Howling Mine, for example. Those are good effects. So this is going to be great for you in Limited. I'd be happy to play it, even though I know it's going to take a little setup. The payout is great. So I'm going to run this when I get a chance and be real happy I did, I think. Another good card for you in Commander, if you have maybe a pirate deck with a lot of treasures going on. As for Standard, I mentioned this before, but there could be a treasure deck. And if that's the case, maybe this makes it into that deck. Aside from that, I don't know if this makes it in the pirate deck because this is kind of taking the eye off of pirates or trying to do a little bit, and that's be all in, probably pretty aggressive and kind of build off of raid and such. So I do think that might be a little bit of a distraction for their ultimate goal. Because of that, I don't know if it gets there, but later on, maybe if there's like a more mid-rangey pirate deck or something like that, then this might make a little more sense. We'll kind of have to see how the meta evolves and how the next set influences that particular archetype. So it has potential, but I think for the most part, this is a card I'm happy to play in Limited and would actually be very happy to play in Commander too under the right circumstances. Vanquisher's Banner. This one's interesting. It costs 5, so you're paying a little bit for it. You choose your creature type. Those creatures now get +1/+1, so it's a nice Anthem effect. But also, when you cast a creature spell of the type, you get to draw a card, and that's actually pretty sweet. So, Anthem effect for 5, as long as you're really deep into that particular tribe, it feels like it could be good for you. So I do think this is a good Limited card. Maybe not for all builds, though. If you're not really all in on a tribe, like maybe you're playing a sealed deck that's a mishmash of a lot of things, then there's probably better things you could be doing at 5. But if you drafted a whole bunch of pirates or a whole bunch of vampires, this card's going to be really, really good. Dinosaurs, it's maybe not quite as impressive because they're kind of big enough to begin with, but card draw is always good, so it's definitely worth considering if nothing else, but sometimes you might rather just play a dinosaur in that particular build. Overall, this is a good card for the right builds in Limited. Can it see Standard play? Perhaps down the road. I don't know if it sees play right now just because I feel like the pirate deck probably doesn't need to mess with this that much. If there ever was a vampire deck, maybe it would be more critical in a deck like that. But again, that might be something we see with the next set. We'll kind of have to watch how the meta goes with that one. But it does have some possible utility. This is also very runnable, of course, in tribal commander builds. All right, let's move on to lands, and of course we know that the rare land cycle will be the allied colored check lands. Now these have been printed a number of times. They're not super expensive or anything like that, but they do make sense with what we're trying to do here. These are dual lands that are really good in 2-color decks. They're okay in 3-color decks. They become worse with 4 or 5-color decks, but because of the nature of this set focusing on 2 to 3 colors, it makes sense that they reprinted these here. And we have the first one, Dragon Skull Summit, which you're going to find is the Rakdos colors. Now, all 5 of these will see standard play, and they will be applicable in Limited too if you're in those colors for sure. Drowned Catacomb, of course, this is the Dimir version. Field of Ruin. Okay, this is interesting. It does tap for colorless mana, which is nice. And then for 2, you can tap and sacrifice it to get rid of a non-basic land that your opponent controls. So you can't do it to yourself. At that point, everybody gets to search for a basic land card and put it into the battlefield. It actually doesn't even come into play tapped. So there's times where you might actually want to do that for yourself, but if your opponent doesn't have a target, you can't. So that's a little bit weird, but it is what it is in that case. But if your opponent has a good target for this, this is great. It's runnable. We've seen some good non-basic lands, of course, in this set, especially if your opponent does the work to go ahead and transform them, and then you just surprise them with this and knock it out. That could be pretty heartbreaking at times, I'm sure. So ultimately, where does this land? Yes, this is very limited playable. Sometimes it'll be out of the sideboard. Sometimes you'll be able to swing this in your main deck. And the difference is, let's say I'm in a 2-color deck. It's pretty even split between the 2 colors. I would main deck this as one of my lands then, because then I could say I'll have maybe 8 of one land, 2 of another land, and this is my 17th land, and I'm probably fine as long as my color requirements aren't too bad. Now, if I'm going 3 colors or something like that, I'm probably not going to main deck this, but I will side it in if I need it, because my opponent could have a really good non-basic land, for example. So that's a very important concept to remember when it comes to lands like this. Yes, they do tap for mana, but it is colorless mana, and a lot of times people see these and say, well, I can just use this as one of my lands, no harm done. That's not always the case. Sometimes it really does hurt your game plan if you're trying to get a little bit greedy with colors, and it could slow you down to the point where it really makes you stumble. So you do have to be careful and be thoughtful about those things. Aside from that, yeah, I could see some standard play again, depending if any of these non-basic lands start to creep up as a threat, and some of them are really good. I think there's some potential for that happening, and because of that, I do think it will get there. And again, this is maybe a redundancy in some ways in Commander, but I do think it's a decent card to play in Commander too. Here's Glacial Fortress, the Czech land in the Azorius colors. Rootbound Crag, the Czech land in the Gruul colors with a dinosaur on it. That's pretty sweet. Sun Petal Grove, this is the Selesnya Czech land. Unclaimed Territory, okay, awesome budget version of Cavern of Souls. Granted, I know it doesn't quite do all the things Cavern of Souls does, but my wallet doesn't really care. My wallet says, you know what, maybe our spells are going to get countered every once in a while. So, other than that, though, it's awesome for tribal, just regardless. Limited purposes, let's talk about that one first. First off, you can actually tap this for colorless mana. That's pretty sweet. Now, of course, when this enters battlefield, you do choose the creature type, and you can get a mana of any color if you're casting a creature of that type, so that's awesome. So again, all the utility we talked about with previous cards that were similar. This is good for fixing your mana, especially for Grixis and Naya. Could be good if you're splashing a little side tribe that is running a different color or something like that than your main colors. So a lot of good reasons to play this. Fantastic card with the tribal synergies. I do think this does see standard play for the same reasons. Again, Grixis and Naya I definitely think will be things in standard. This card is going to complement those decks well. And then beyond that, I think Commander, this is just an awesome budget option for Cavern, or a redundancy for Cavern if you happen to own one already. So really cool card here. Awesome inclusion. And finally, Unknown Shores. This is a reprint, and it's just a limited color filter land. It does tap for colorless, but if you need to fix your color, it's fine to run something like this. Maybe you're splashing a third or something like that. It's a good utility to have. Alright, with that being said, guess what? That is the whole set we got there. So I'm excited to play this set, and pre-release starts midnight on Friday and goes throughout the weekend all over the world. So I hope you get a chance to play in the pre-release. Definitely let me know in the comments of the videos how you do and how your pre-release experience was. Did you get any crazy polls? Always love to hear that stuff. Now tomorrow we're going to come back with a pre-release primer video, and if you've never seen those before, they're really geared towards new players. We're going to talk about what to expect from a pre-release, what you need to know, what you should bring, and some of the high-level stuff about the set, like mechanics and stuff like that. The next day, we're going to talk about the high-value cards that you could find when you open packs this weekend for Ixalan. And really, I like to do videos like that just to give people an idea going to the pre-release what's worth a little money so they don't get scammed into a bad trade or something like that. And then Saturday, we'll do our regular market watch as well. But until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.